December 31st, 1600. A New Year's Eve in London. Queen Elizabeth I set her quill to parchment. A signature was etched upon the vellum. In that moment, the world changed. For one company at least. The East India Company. The name may mean little to us today, but this was no ordinary trading company. A revolutionary structure where ordinary citizens pooled their capital and shared the risks of enterprise together. It was a radical organization for its time, the embodiment of the modern joint stock company model. And yet, what it would become was a monster no one had imagined. Its original purpose was simple: pepper, cloves, nutmeg, spices traded at the price of gold across Europe, carried from Asia to the West. That was all. But trade cannot exist without power. Competition with the Dutch, Portuguese, and French grew fierce. The East India Company reached one conclusion: without military force behind it, commerce could not survive. A corporation raised an army. Chartered companies of the era were delegated quasi-sovereign powers by the state. They could build fortresses, hire soldiers, and cast cannons. What is unthinkable by modern standards existed as institutional reality in the 17th century. The East India Company exploited that structure to its fullest extent. But an organization that acquires military force rarely confines it to defense alone. History has proven this truth again and again. By the early 19th century, the numbers were staggering. The East India Company's army, estimated at 200,000 to 300,000 strong. The majority were Indian soldiers, local troops known as sepoys. A single corporation had amassed a military force of extraordinary scale. What did this mean? The answer began in the Bengal region of India. June 23, 1757. The plains of Plassey. Robert Clive, 32 years old. An East India Company officer facing overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Clive's forces, approximately 3,000 men. The Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, estimated at more than 50,000. There was no contest. Everyone believed that. But Clive knew something they did not. Numbers are not the only variable on the battlefield. He had already bribed one of the Nawab's commanders in secret. The battle was decided in a matter of hours. Mir Jafar, the key commander within the Nawab's forces, refused to move as ordered. Confusion spread. The army collapsed. Sources vary, but Clive's forces suffered as few as 22 killed, fewer than 100 casualties in total. Bengali losses, by contrast, are said to have numbered in the hundreds. The Battle of Plassey. It was a political transaction dressed in the name of war. But from that day forward, the history of India bent sharply. Bengal, a prosperous region home to tens of millions of people and immense wealth, fell under the company's dominion. 8 years after Plassey, in 1765, the East India Company received a decree from the Mughal emperor. The right to collect revenues from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, the Diwani. This was the decisive turning point. The moment military dominance transformed into administrative control. Taxes were collected by company agents. Laws were made by company directors. Military operations were commanded by company officers. This was not the act of a corporation. It was the act of a state. And yet, it was carried out by a joint stock company. A joint stock company that governed tens of millions of people while sending dividends to its shareholders. But dominion carries a price. The East India Company extracted wealth from Bengal with ruthless efficiency. Taxation of the peasantry was crushing. Agriculture withered. 1770. A great famine descended upon Bengal. Estimates vary among historians, but the devastation claimed millions of lives. Some accounts suggest as many as 10 million. Reports may have reached the shareholders in London. But the question they asked was this: what about the dividend? The company's gravest commercial problem was its trade balance. Britain craved Chinese tea in enormous quantities, but China wanted almost nothing Britain had to offer. Without a solution, silver would flow ceaselessly into China. The East India Company found its answer. Opium was produced and managed in Bengal, then sold to private merchants. Those merchants smuggled it into China, and the system expanded. Force Indian peasants to cultivate poppies, produce and control the opium. Private merchants smuggle it into China, use the proceeds to purchase tea, sell the tea to Britain. An elegant triangular trade. Behind that elegance stood millions of addicts. China was not blind to this. Qing officials warned repeatedly of opium's devastation. Bans were issued. Seizures were ordered. But the flow of opium did not stop. Why? Because the profits were too vast. This would eventually escalate into the First Opium War, fought from 1839 to 1842. But that is another story. What we must confront today is a single question. Why did acts of this magnitude continue for so long? But here something important must be understood. It is not true that nothing could have stopped the East India Company's rule. The Regulating Act of 1773, the India Act of 1784, the Charter Acts of 1813 and 1833. Parliament progressively tightened its oversight of the company. The company was not a purely private enterprise. It was a governing body delegated authority by the state, and it was constrained within that system. But it took a long time for those institutions to catch up with the realities on the ground. And in the time that elapsed, 300 million people were ruled. By the 1850s, the East India Company held most of the Indian subcontinent in its grip. Some territories were governed directly. Others were bound by treaty to vassal princely states held under indirect control. On the map, it looked like an empire. Beneath the map, it was a corporation. What is a state? What is a corporation? The East India Company erased the line between them. Or perhaps more precisely, it proved that the line had never truly existed at all. May 10, 1857. Meerut, India. Indian soldiers of the East India Company raised their rifles. The spark was a rumor. The new rifle cartridges were greased with pig and cow fat, and to load the weapon, soldiers had to bite off the end with their teeth. Pork is forbidden to Muslims. Beef, sacred to Hindus. The East India Company had ignored the grievance, but the anger ran deeper than cartridges. The seizure of farmland, the deposition of princes, the humiliation of faith. 10 years, 20 years accumulated. The tension in Meerut spread across the whole of India. This was the beginning of the Indian Rebellion. The uprising was fierce. Delhi, Kanpur, Lucknow, India's great cities, fell one by one to the rebel forces. The East India Company commanded an army of more than 200,000. But much of that army had risen in revolt. It took more than a year to suppress, and this rebellion told the end of an era. August 1858. The British Parliament passed a law, the Government of India Act. The East India Company was stripped of its power to govern India. India became a crown territory under Queen Victoria. Corporate rule was replaced by the rule of the state. But this was not an ending. The dominion continued. One could say only the nameplate had changed. January 1st, 1874. The East India Company was formally wound up and dissolved. Its commercial monopoly had been dismantled in 1833. Its governing powers passed to the Crown in 1858. And in 1874, the company itself vanished from history. 274 years from its founding in 1600. The headquarters building on Leadenhall Street in London was eventually demolished. Nothing remained. But what the East India Company left behind was not a building. It was a question. How did a corporation become a state? And why could no one stop it? So what can we learn from this story of 274 years? The history of the East India Company leaves us 3 lessons. The first, power does not justify purpose. In the name of profit, it raised vast armies and ruled hundreds of millions of people. There always lies a question of universal ethics. The second, without oversight, organizations run out of control. The shareholders in London did not know, or chose not to know, what was happening thousands of miles away. The absence of accountability breeds atrocity, though the absence was not permanent. After 1773, Parliament sought through law to rein the company in, step by step. But in the time it took for institutions to catch up with reality, much was lost. The third. When military force and commercial power unite, the most dangerous organizations in history are born. Historian William Dalrymple has observed this. The East India Company is not merely a relic of the past. It is the ancestor of today's corporate giants and their lobbying power. And so I put the question to you. History records only outcomes, but those who lived it did not know how it would end. If today you invest in a company and you do not know what it is doing in a distant country, do you bear responsibility for that? As organizations grow vast, where does individual ethics go? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. Within the stories of history's great corporations and towering figures lie strategies and lessons that transcend their age. As with the East India Company, what appears ordinary today is often the product of specific concentrations of power and institutional design. And on this channel, we continue to excavate that question. Where does power go wrong? Why do organizations run out of control? And what decisions were made at history's pivotal crossroads? If that's what drives your curiosity, subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time.